Hello and welcome back to the Mage, the Hero Described podcast. This is episode 21, and things are going to be shook up a little bit as the podcast comes back from 2.5, almost 3 years long of a hiatus. Going to cover that in the upcoming episode, get into some details there, but we're coming back as a vodcast. If you're listening to this as a podcast, just follow the link to the YouTube channel in the show notes. And in this first episode, I think you're going to enjoy it. We've got some guest hosts, Eli Schwab, Ben Granoff, both from the Devil in Detail podcast, the Grendel podcast. I'll go into that once the episode starts. In the meantime, if you enjoy this, as I said before, please, in the podcasts, give us 5 stars. Give us a review if you like this. If you're happy to see the podcast come back, love to hear from you. And if you're watching this on YouTube, just go down below, give us a thumbs up. Love to get some comments. Always open to feedback and thoughts about both the podcast and what you enjoy about Matt Wagner's Mage series. The whole story. Trilogy's done, so give your thoughts about everything, but love to hear your thoughts about this episode. And with no further ado, I'm going to drop you on into my discussion with Eli and Ben. Enjoy. Have a great one. Stay excellent. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Mage, the Hero Described podcast. We've got a new look, new approach, doing this as a vodcast now, and you can see on the screen that for this kind of revisit what I think this the podcast has been off the air for almost 2 years now, since Mage 3 wrapped up. And I've got Eli and Ben from the amazing Devil in Detail vodcast podcast. You guys rock. Let's do some groundwork for everybody here. This is a reread. Going to be going through, starting back up, going to be going through The Hero Discovered. Yeah, got it right there. Got the original. Got those early 90s, mid-90s reprint there. And just going to be going through. So there's going to be, like the previous one, spoilers are going to abound all the way through the entire series. You know, no holds barred. Nothing is off the table. So with that, guys, for anybody who somehow doesn't know who you are, doesn't know about the Grendel Devil in Detail vodcast and podcast, why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Totally, man.
We're in Eli's cave. He's the impresario, publisher, cartoonist, writer, and mastermind behind Cosmic Lion Productions. What else do you do?
I also make my own comic called Monkey Lion about an intergalactic Afro-funk band on tour through the galaxy. We put out this fan zine for Grendel for our podcast.
A must-have.
A must-have, not for sale. Please leave a 5-star review and email me.
So cool, so amazing, tons of good
easy.
Stuff in it.
Exactly. We started the Devil in Detail because we became friends. We found out we both loved Grendel. I loved the Mage, the Hero Described as well. I listened to it every episode as it came out. I loved it. And so I was like, we should do that with Grendel. We found out that we were like long lost soulmates.
You were the inspiration to do the project, Kevin.
Sweet, man. At least some small good came out of it.
Oh, I think a lot of good did. Y'all should make sure you go back and listen to that. And follow me at Cosmic Lion on Instagram for more, or cosmiclionproductions.com. What about you, Ben? What else do you do?
I do a podcast with you.
That's true, yes.
I'm a cartoonist. I teach storyboarding at the New York Film Academy.
Right.
And I am delighted to have spent the better part of a week here in Los Angeles with Eli. We had an incredible trip. Yeah, we had amazing bin diving. I found a large stack of books that was on my list to get, and have an even larger stack that weren't.
I found the entire run of Mage the Hero defined in the dollar bin. 1 to 10, actually, not the full run, but
he means that in a good way.
yeah,
That's great. I mean,
and almost the full run of Grendel Volume 2.
So we have lots of giveaway comics for this podcast and our own.
Oh man. And I was watching that dollar bin live cast that you did the other day, and Ben, you were like diving into those old Marvel epics. It was looking like I recognized a few. I meant to grab 1 or 2 out. I recognized that Light and Darkness War, and Blood, which was only 4 issues. That was Mateus's thing. 4 issues. That was huge when that came out. It was a lot of people started doing that. I think you referred to as like a whole watercolor kind of approach. That was big for a minute, and kind of gave it an air of respectability and art.
Yeah,
high
I
art.
only know that movement from like the very end, like Books of Magic, like when it sort of moved back into like Charles Vess illustration, like where he kind of took the reins over that, and him and PCR, and then the watercolor guys. A lot of them do children's books or other things, or John J. Muth and all those guys have other careers outside of comics.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting movement. All I remember now is that at the time, and granted, I think I was end of high school, at that time when those came out, and it was all very heady. It was very different than, much like, like Mage. It was very different than anything else that was typically out there by the big 2 usually. I don't know how it stands up over time. I mean, it was very purposefully deep and a different storytelling approach, which was exciting for the time.
Yeah, I think the line is a testament to Archie and how he saw comics and how he looked at storytelling and how they tried to be on the cutting edge of color and production. Sometimes there's Steel Grip Starkey #1 has like a brochure tip in.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
those are fun.
It's all kind of, I mean, I could talk about Epic's another podcast. Let's talk about Mage.
No, good. I just
Epicast.
wanted to give a nod to it. I mean, great stuff. It looks like you guys have had great fun.
That's been great.
So tell me, I'm gonna go ahead and go back and forth with the 2 of you. Eli, let's start with you. I'd like to know your guys' Mage story before we go on into it. Everybody's got a Mage story. How did you come to Mage, and what do you enjoy about it that it's interesting enough for you to decide to come onto a podcast and talk about it?
I feel like I don't really remember when I first encountered it, but I do know that I'm fairly certain I came to it through like other stuff that I liked. I think like when I was growing up, I felt like I grouped like Madman and Grendel and Mage and these types of books, like these
The Maverick books.
like Maverick Underground heroes together. So like I feel like I got into like Madman and the Jam, that book first, and that kind of turned me on to other things. I think like Kevin Smith helped me get turned on a little bit. I think maybe even like I love Chasing Amy.
So how old are you, by the way? Well,
I'm 37.
So I feel like when Mage 2 happened, we were about your age.
Right. When Mage 2 happened, that's when I was like buying it off the rack. Yeah. That was my time for it. I think so. Like, Banky in it was wearing a Madman shirt. And I think I looked it up and I mistook it for a Mage shirt. And then I ended up buying I bought this exact one.
Mm-hmm.
And I started reading and I was just like, oh, okay. I love this. Even if I was wrong with the shirt, I love this.
You really tracked it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you tracked down something that you loved.
Yeah, and then I got this shirt. I've had this shirt since high school. And I think I just started to just dig it. I loved the art. It seemed like accessible and inspiring. The eyebrow to eye thing that Matt does a lot in the old thing. I mean, I copped that immediately and started doing that in my art. So it was just a gradual thing. And it wasn't like the older cousin turned you onto it. It was just kind of like I picked up these little seeds to like kind of get there myself. It was cool.
So, and another thing with Chasing Amy, I think at the very beginning in the opening credits to that, you actually get a Mage call out and a Matt Wagner call out, something about like, Matt Wagner is back. Show flashes through in the opening credits on that as well.
Oh, I think so. Like, cause they're panning through all the, the comic book convention and you got actual Mike Allred in there.
Yeah. What about you, Ben?
I had a retailer who was like, he was only not awful to me because he turned me on to this book when I was young. He was like not a nice guy, but he did have the taste to put me onto this and Frank Miller and all that. So I got the Batman Faces trade in like 7th grade. I remember taking into the art class and like drawing big, Batman figures out of it and stuff like that. And then when Mage 2 came out, the guy just said, "Oh, here's what I like and I want to sell." And he pitched me all the heroes of myth and legend are reincarnated to fight ultimate evil throughout the time. And I was like, "Oh, that sounds awesome." and I already liked like Matt's storytelling style. I don't know if I had it in my mind if they're the same guy, but what I've always liked about Mage is how it really takes its time, and it marries like the things that I like formally about comics and character study, but also that like the layouts always reflect the kinetic quality of the action. It's very easy to bring it to life in your imagination. The contrast between Mage and Grendel is really interesting because, one is super dense and there's lots of stuff happening off camera that you're delivered in exposition. It's like, oh man, there could be a story about that sometime. But the Mage project, like they contrast each other so beautifully.
Yeah, definitely. There's a I was thinking about that as getting ready for this and listening to some of your earlier Devil in Detail casts, and some things that occurred to me that are definitely contrasty is inside Mage, and when we take a look at it, no narrative. There's no boxes providing any third person omniscient overview. Only for a short period of time do you actually have thought bubbles. And I think with an interview with Matt at the close of Mage 3, at the close of the series, I think I had a chance to ask him about that, and he raised up, largely a function of early on, Kevin doesn't really have many people to bounce dialogue off of. So for a while it was necessary to kind of move things along, and then dropped away. One thing that I think is interesting that the two of them do have in common, and I think might be a young writer thing, is of course both in many ways one is explicitly and the other one is kind of treated as an orphan, right? Early on, you don't have to worry about how do I write family, how do I deal with all those complications. They're just these two different guys in these situations. One
lone characters.
Yeah, and there are themes that run through the different Grendel characters that all kind of stem from Hunter traits that Kevin also has sort of experience too. So the young writer pulling themselves out into these characters. Sure.
Yeah. And he said a lot about how these two reflect different aspects of him. Why don't we, some of the history, let's talk about some of the history of Mage. Thanks for sharing those stories. I'll really thumbnail for anybody who hasn't listened to earlier versions of this podcast. I think in an early one, I mentioned I was just walking down a street. I was probably 17 years old, maybe 18, walking down the street somewhere in New York, past a comic store, and it must have just wrapped up. And in retrospect, I think that I had seen earlier issues at my local comic store, but maybe some of the earlier issues hadn't caught my eye. There was a lot going on there in the mid early 80s, but I was still coming out of that very Marvel driven universe. I had been introduced, I had been weaned on, the Byrne Claremont run in X-Men and things like that. And, during the 80s, there were lots of exciting things. I wish I still had my few first prints of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Ended up selling those way too early. But I'm walking past and I saw they had on display in the window issue 14 and issue 15. And the covers of those, it was the cover of, and actually, no, it had to be 13 and 14. Because the one that caught my eye was the big no cover, just kind of stands out, and grabbed both of those in an instant. Had no idea what I was going to get into. And, I was off to the races from there. But it took me years, literally, I'd say 2 to 3 years to be able to finally finish my collection. And it wasn't until I stopped into some random comic shop in San Francisco. I mean, it was just wherever I went, I would just drop into comic stores randomly, trying to fill in the gaps. There was no internet. There was, that was it. I had one comic store where I grew up. So, went in, managed to find issue number 7. It was my last grab.
That's like how at Spiro's Heroes, when we were bin diving on the way out, one of the books that was like on the top of my list that completes a run, Squadron Supreme #2, was just staring at me and just yoinked it out.
That's awesome. That's a great feeling.
It was great.
Also, if people haven't listened to your podcast previously, definitely do. But the Matt interview you do have at the end of the first season is so good. It's one of the best interviews with Matt ever done.
Thanks, man. He was amazingly generous, and you guys have had some great runs with him and talks with him and the rest of the crew that worked on Grendel. Let's talk about how Mage started with Matt, and just to give people some background, how this thing came to be. And you've got some great stuff in the back there. I've got some close-ups that I'll share. He tells the story there, but Kamiko, he was with Kamiko, started by Bill Cucinata, Gary. I don't know if it's Gary or Jerry Giovanco. And they had done some of the black and whites, and they were ready to go to color. They had Evangeline all set up and ready to go, and they needed another color book to go. Grendel had been so well received, and the way things were printed, gang printed, I think they call it, they needed another book. Came to Matt, and it sounds like Matt he says as much in the foreword to Mage 1, to the first book of Mage, Hero Discovered, that this is an idea that had been percolating for a while. I think he says it at the beginning of that one, that this isn't a book that he's started and stopped, and he had been working on it.
He would never see it evolve into anything remotely enough to publish. But
right.
It was tossing it around so much.
And he had started working on something called Dragon, minus the pen, with the Arthurian connections, Dragon. And he showed in that, and what you've got right there, Ben, I think he shows these 2 snippets of pages from that.
Wow. I had forgot about this.
He's got the ring, and voila.
Sweet. And the bubbles, the magic bubbles are there.
Yeah, good call. Good call. He's got the magic bubbles. It's it's a very different approach and art style than also what the direction Mage would end up taking. But around that time, Camelot 3000 comes out.
Yeah.
And so he's like, well, this other artist, his own words, is really great. They're already doing this idea, but another light that went off for him, he's mentioned in interviews, is that it was, I don't want to say boring, but it was plastic. It was a plastic and predictable approach to the mythic figures that he wanted to bring to life. And
Camelot 3000 was?
Yeah, the Camelot 3000. I found an interview. He calls it, maybe, the typical comic approach. He's actually not saying that Camelot 3000 was. I want to correct that here. The typical comic approach to mythic figures was plastic and predictable.
Sure,
I don't want to put words in his mouth about a specific work. His comment about specific.
I found Camelot 3000 unreadable, though gorgeous to look at. Like one of the best looking books I've ever found, but I found it impenetrable.
Yeah, it was Arthur against aliens, right?
I have no idea. Couldn't tell you what it's about. Let's do it.
I haven't read it.
All right. So the mythic approach doesn't have enough soul.
Yeah, he wanted to bring it to life. It lost its, what is it? Was it maybe it's Ezra Pound? The wine has no energy. The ritual has no spirit. I'm really laying on a different influence and direction here, but that was really the feeling I got.
Yeah, that's a good call out.
And then
it's funny how the dragon stuff. Sorry, Kevin. The dragon stuff looks like just a little bit like more evolved than the Grendel archive material.
Yeah.
Than the primer stuff. It's just it's like less
manga,
like less Tezuka.
Yeah.
And it must be living in this in between space. It sounds like he had finished up with where Grendel was, at least so far. Put it on the shelf, continuing to grow. All these are growth era artworks and pieces for Matt. So then he says his first sighting of Kevin Matchstick, and you've got these in there as well, I think, Ben, is his first sighting of Mirth and Kevin Matchstick
Whoa.
comes along, and he was apparently at Penn's Landing in Philadelphia, sketching, no real intent, no real ideas, just kind of zenning out and letting things come to him. And he describes these. Now, there's the hardbound editions of Mage. In the introductory letter to the first hardbound edition, he describes saying, hey, one of them was this punky-looking ponchoed, leg-wrapped, and generally sprightly street magician. The other was myself, tired, skeptical, and mundane. This was a side of myself that I'd never been able to draw before. This then was my first sight of Kevin Matchstick.
Wow.
And then he says, now this I don't think is the first one. And interviews can be a little bit conflicting, not trying to necessarily put together an exact timeline, but in that same volume, he says, when I next saw Kevin Matchstick, he had changed. Still remarkably earthy, he now wore the gaudiness and spectacle of his childhood fantasies on his very chest. Though he looked out at the world through those jaded eyes, he was brave enough to wear his hopes out in the open. This time he had a black t-shirt with a white lightning bolt down the front. Here then was the hero I was looking for inside me. And
cool.
I think in an interview, it might even be in a comment inside that issue that you've got there, Ben, he mentions that he had even added the lightning bolt as an afterthought. It just it wasn't planned. It just kind of came.
Well, it really ties the whole thing together.
Yeah. Well, he said the
works
influences of his youth. So does that mean like Shazam or like another character that had like a similar?
Yeah, doesn't it kind of look like an early appearance Shazam, because it's narrow at the top, and then
that one right there,
and then like this is closer to Shazam,
right?
But maybe when he was like, well, I'm not getting cease and desist letters, I'm gonna leave it to
we can't fool Shazam.
Well, there's also, I think, a Captain Marvel, I mean, either.
I guess, yes, that's his real name anyway.
All those, Shazam. It's been. I think I was knee high to a grasshopper the last time I read any Shazam, so it gets all blended together. Now about Mirth, he mentions though, this was a purposeful approach to say, let's go young instead of old, a youthful energy, right, kind of to help, balance out, to break through Kevin's cynicism. And you can see here he's got this red poncho that he states in an interview, I think, I'm not sure it's in that volume, that this got changed to blue to do a subtle visual tie between the blue of Kevin's blue jeans and Mirth, just to give a little bit of a tie there.
Interesting, bit of unity.
Yeah, bring it all together. So let's get on into it. There's I've got a ton of notes here, and I'm going to be careful about how far I go on into them. But you guys want to dive on into the issue?
Let's dive.
Okay, I'm going to bring up here because one of the things that was great about this first series, and Kamiko loved to do this, was these big wraparound covers.
Right.
And you guys have been highlighting those in Grendel. Yeah, I had this in here because obviously, talking about, Matt putting himself into Kevin, and you can just see these side by side here. There's right, that old comic creator trading card image there of Matt.
Yeah.
Next to Matchstick.
Very Kevin, yeah.
But here we go. Here's that full cover of this issue here.
Nice, yeah. This is the only time that they add the like blurb on the back that gives a little bit of the thing of what's going on, but that makes sense for a first issue of a brand new series.
This is the first time I'm seeing this wraparound.
Oh, really?
I own the book. I just hasn't occurred to me.
It's only half really wraparound, I'd say, because
you want to read the copy? It's too small for me to see.
In the eternal struggle, it is fact that men need heroes more than heroes need men. Kevin Matchstick is needed. He doesn't know it. Thrust into a battle that he doesn't understand and experiencing a power that he can't control. Kevin is the hero reborn, alone in the world and lost in a confusion spawned by the dark power of the minions of the Umbra Sprite. Kevin discovers that there is a comrade for him, Mirth, the enigmatic and evasive world mage.
Yeah, a little marketing material on the cover. Mm-hmm. Sell the book. Looks great.
Sell the book.
Yeah. There's a few of those. I don't know where they drop off. I got to take a look at it. I know it's on a few other issues at least.
Oh, okay.
But they've all got these wonderful wraparound covers that are just glorious to look at.
And which are soon spiked down by the Grendel Devil in Detail
Double ID.
Devil by the Deed,
yeah.
ads for the backups.
Yeah, that'll run right on in here. But that's so skillfully done. It's just like this bookmark, kind of
Absolutely.
sliver down the side. So let's get back on over to the issue here and take a look in.
Get inside.
And this is one of those things that, you don't get in the reprints, is these great forwards that Matt does. You'd already read some of the information, but talking about just the hero, he has to act and act again. And there's some discussion that Matt did in some interviews talking about, the concept of a hero. And he gets really specific in the foreword to issue 2, but just that, and I think this was even in his interview with the Telegraph Wire with Diana Schutz, where he's talking about, we all have circumstances that we react to. We don't necessarily set out to be a hero. We have circumstances that are thrust upon us that we have to be heroic in response to. I'm paraphrasing wildly here, but
and we see that very quickly when we open the book. Like, it happens quick.
And the only other person on these earlier issues working with Matt is Robert Pinaha. Do either of you know how to correctly pronounce his last name?
I think Diana said Pinaha.
Yes.
Pinaha?
Yeah.
And he apparently had been sent by Kamiko the first 2 pages of both Mage and Evangeline, and he said as much that he had hoped that he would get Evangeline because it was what he was used to. It was action driven, etc. And there's later on I'll share a story about what he had to say in one of the intros to one of the other books, and we get that great outrageous slings and arrows. What's going to run through all of the books. Those references to a particular different Shakespearean work, and both Kevin and Mirth kind of having their own symbol. Mirth doesn't wear anything on him in a superhero fashion, but you see this kind of right there. Well, almost. It doesn't go all the way down, but you get that little blaze mark.
And they changed that in the digital version too. Mirth's logo looks a little bit different. There's a bigger shine. I love you, Jeremy Cox, but I don't like the digital colors.
I like it. It's what I was used to. It's what I'm used to. So I wouldn't say I don't mind it at all, but I guess people say that this whole book, all the Matt early work, people are like, well, it's very raw. Like, Dave Sim at 21 is very raw. Yeah, but it's good. You want to watch him get better, and it gets better so quickly. Yeah, and the storytelling is so good that never once have I looked at this work and been like, oh, it's raw. It's not formed. Oh, give me a break. The storytelling and the editing is so exciting. Yeah, and comes to life in our imaginations beautifully.
Agreed.
And it works with the story so well. When I finally went, I read the end of the story first, and then I went back and discovered it. And when I went back to issue 1, when I got issue 1 and 2, I was really confused at the difference in the artwork. I had no idea who Matt was. I didn't know this was one of his, first works, that he was a developing artist. So I really had to settle on, at the time, I was like, oh, this must be on purpose. And the fact that either way, doesn't matter. It is. We're seeing his allegorical analog grow into his power as he's growing into his power.
Yeah. I love seeing that too.
And the colors are very different than obvious. These are just, much more muted. Colors are so important to, well, we'll talk about that in another time when things start to change up with the series. We have Kevin coming along and out of the blue running into this guy on the street. And
well, you can't forget that he's singing the Stray Cats, and that singing a song or a song opening each book is going to continue till the end.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And this is, that's Stray Cats he's singing there, and they bump into each other, but just randomly, he just spills his guts.
Yeah. I was thinking Kevin's like coming home. He's like walking home from the bar or something. Like he's got a bit of a buzz on or something, because like he's walking, he's got kind of like a funny face. Like, what's he doing out there in the middle of the night singing by himself? He must be coming home from the bar.
We started out with a theater motif with Shakespeare. The acting in this opening sequence, it's like they're on a stage, and Kevin's face does a lot of heavy lifting here. It's a real cartooning special effect on display.
Yeah, that's a great call, and there is, throughout this, the faces even this early on, to go back to what you were mentioning there, Ben, I mean, the expressions and what gets conveyed in looks or, glances, grimaces, body posture, this all feels very cinematic to me. Also, this is not posturing thing. And Ben, you do so much with storyboarding. What are your thoughts? I mean, you made a reference to this before as we'll go through this. Every time I look at this feels, I think live performance is great. It just feels very cinematic to me in a way that typical capes and cowls action does not.
I think that was what turned us on. We were all like Marvel zombie kids, and this just opened, doors of perception and all that. I'm still mostly like, the lighting is very on point and very dramatic. These complicated angles of like Kevin's like, you're looking up his nostrils and then down his nose, and it's all very, very well constructed. I don't know. It's paced out nicely. It might be one of those things where if you film this word for word, it might not have the same effect watching and hearing other people do it. Not only because it's written by a very young man 30 years ago, but because it really is designed to be a comic. That's always its first consideration, is how do I use the form to visually communicate with complete clarity so that the entire audience is always in consensus about what's going on. Well, we're all sharing this dream together.
Yeah. And what's being conveyed here by Kevin, whether it's a barroom confidential where you'll say things to a stranger that you would never say to somebody close to you, whether it's sometimes, and this is a little bit closer to the role between the characters, sometimes you just meet somebody and the two of you just click immediately and you can just talk about anything. But when we go through all these things, are you alone? Yes, I'm completely. Parents, loving, but basically blind. Friends, idiots, lovers, and then really strong. I've had a few in my pitiful little life. All have betrayed me. It's a strong word there. Yeah. But another interview, when he's talking about, the concept of Grendel being the demon of society's mediocrity, there's some interesting thoughts, because this all comes from the same time frame for Matt, where he's talking about things like, he had once responded to somebody asking about that, saying, now, if that's not an unfiltered expression of teen angst, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
And in many ways, talking about, how he was portraying these fantastical versions of the way he saw the world in so many ways, right? Coming from this rural environment. And when I think about like, okay, so how does that urban mystique from Grendel transfer on over to Mage? In the same area, he's talking about, hey, as an only child, he was an only child. So I'm sure I felt quite a me against the world vibe most of my youth. Not that he was an utter loner. He had friends and was pretty social, but let's face it, who doesn't feel like the rest of the world just doesn't understand you during those painful adolescent years, right? So, he's taking a look at all that, and I think we see that attitude. I mean, especially look at that first panel, rebel, he's singing about rebellion right from the start.
Well, the difference between this and say Pete Townsend, who never stopped writing about teenage angst until he was in his 40s, is that, in Matt's 40-year career, he's moved through all the cycles of his life, and that's one of the things that this book does so well. Another great contrast between Grendel and Mage is that Mage, from the start, like Cerebus, had a very specific structure of how it was going to be released. Really, really clever. 3 15-issue arcs, and I will take as long as I need to take for my life to tell its story, for me to interpret it. And Grendel's just a free-for-all.
Yeah.
Could be anything. It could be a novel. It could be a mini, a one-shot, a crossover.
Agreed. Yeah.
All right, let's keep on going here. I want to respect your guys' time. All right, so just great impact here. Kevin keeps moving on, gets questioned if he's so sure that his life is so very little, and
Mirth's
that
like,
great.
I don't think it.
I'm completely ineffectual, and then.
But who's not ineffectual is Jeremy Cox on this.
That is good.
He's really got it. And, and the way that he treats Kevin in the foreground has a lot of cinematography oomph to it.
Yeah, I like the feel of the like 80s coloring. It puts it in a place of time. cements it as like an 80s
You know,
underground book to me. But like,
that's
okay,
true.
it does look cool there.
It's like a lot of times with Jeremy Cox, it's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Like look at him getting chunky here in 1998.
I know, yeah.
Right?
He's
So
doing like
he is doing urban
bread
texture
and
stuff.
chunks. Yeah.
And one thing that happens to Matt that also happened to Kevin Eastman is that never having like lived in New York City or being new to Philadelphia, there's all this minutia of detail within like the setting that it's not quite there yet.
Yeah.
These are it feels like a stage.
Yeah,
Again,
exactly.
maybe that's intentional.
I think
Or that's a good reading. It feels like a stage.
Yeah, someone write the stage production of Mage #1.
That especially these early ones. I mean, they're like they're not exactly set pieces, but they are. You could definitely see these requirements.
Yeah.
So were
this
you
is a clean
referring
stage and a wall?
Ben, were you
It's
referring
not-
to this spread?
Yeah,
the
and then when he
green.
uses the magic
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
sprays it out green.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference for sure between Jeremy Cox and I mean Matt did the original colors, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Matt did the original, did the colors throughout. And
he only really brought on, I mean, like Sam Keaton inked a bit, but that was it. All the rest he
And
did.
Joe
Matt?
Joe colored a bunch of this.
Oh, Joe Matt colored.
I mean, later on. I don't know. I don't know if this was
but in series in the first
the
series,
issue, yeah.
the color, he said, he had a choice. Was he going to bring somebody on for color or to do inks? Because there was just so much going on. He couldn't, and he decided he wanted to keep the color. And, when he brings in those airbrushes later, which I don't remember, it was a kind of pen, right? An airbrush that he could change out the colors quickly because you
It's
put
like
these
a
markers
marker compatible. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh
So
you like
that
you
allowed
still
him to
blow
keep-
though, right? He was
Yeah,
like
it's
blowing.
still hooked up
Yeah.
to the compressor. It's just it's the reservoir isn't liquid. It's housed inside of a marker, so it's a much cleaner process.
Awesome.
So we'll get to see that in some future episodes. So Kevin moves along, sees a mugging, great cynical attitude, great mugging.
Well,
This is
this
what
is-
I wanted to.
This is what we were talking about. This is like, and Ben was saying earlier when we were reading together, he says like, he's lamenting the fact that he's like, oh God, but then he interrupts
great.
his
Just what I
thought.
wanted to see.
Yeah, but he interrupts his thought and immediately jumps into action, and that's the like where I see as the turning point as him from being just
Yeah.
Kevin on the street to like the Pendragon is
Yeah.
bubbling up inside of
You
him.
want to see a place where Jeremy Cox is doing a really nice job telling a story?
I do, thank you.
It's that in panel. I'm on page 5 in Jeremy Cox.
Uh-huh.
Panel 2
Yeah.
has Matt doing the take.
Handshake, yeah.
Same yellow-orange burst as this panel,
Oh, I see.
where he continues to realize, and then the burst that comes on him with these like manga speedline effects is green. So it's like yellow. It's like he's the realization, and then
It's like
the
an
visual,
explosion of
the
thought.
visual tie together.
Oh, yeah. And
So-
then that alludes to like the magic coming through.
My case for Jeremy Cox will continue to grow.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I think there's pluses and minuses. I don't think there's any question that he did great work on it and that it adds a lot. You get to revisit it, right? Some of these things, like you're telling a bit of a different story with the coloring in the panel
Yeah.
there, where he says, "Hey,"
Yeah.
and he's actually for the first time literally taking action, right? This is
Yeah, exactly.
this is the first time. That's a great point there, Ben. I think coming from the original, you got to be also, whenever something's redone, it's jarring. You're used to. You see a different choices there also in the reaction shot, top right hand corner there also
Yeah.
with the colors.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think even Matt says that he doesn't love the colors now looking back. I think most artists, when they look back at a 30-year-old work, they're like, ugh, I don't even want to look at it or whatever. But
He's
for us
he
fans,
does a nice job on this page, especially in the high angle shot of him walking
love it. Yeah.
vertically down.
Mhm.
The other thing is that Matt's style in this book is obviously more suited to newsprint and something
Okay,
more
yeah.
rough hewn.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that I don't like the Kimiko, but my rose colored glasses are too strong to not defend this one.
Yeah.
The honor of this one. This is a very nice
Next
page.
spread though kills.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we all have we all have different rose colored glasses frames too. That's a great point depending on our frame of reference here. All right, so we get into action. I think this is like a 7-page fight scene, maybe a little bit
Right.
more.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just thwump these. This is the first sign of that. Just I'd never seen anybody treat sound effects, and it's throughout the series quite the way that Matt treats sound effects. They're
Definitely.
maybe not a
Integrated
character
within the
unto
artwork.
themselves,
Yeah.
but
Right. They not only are integrated, but they interact or take out, they white out some of the frame and they
When we do arcane in this lump panel, we would refer to, because we're taking someone else's digital lettering and then we erase into it. We call it patching. So the way that his heels and his and this dust cloud, we would patch the sound effect behind those planes,
right?
Just by erasing that little bit. But here, all of his graphic design chops are on display because it's fonts. It's like how like Walt Simonson took Von Bodie fonts, or Walt Simonson would go look at jam jars and like get fonts from the supermarket. Real graphic design approach. Matt has like lots of different typographies for different types of sounds coming up.
all right. Let's any other thoughts on I'm gonna really turn it over. You guys speak the visual, and Eli, early on we had talked about this when we first met. I think I even mentioned it in the original podcast when I was going through Hero Denied. My comic art vocabulary and frame of reference is to quote Joan Baez, limited and underfed. Maybe that's actually Bob Dylan I'm quoting there. Anyways, so
but your library quotes is top notch.
Hey, I haven't even hit my comparison between Kevin Matchstick and the famous bullfighter Manolette. I'm telling you.
That's where you shine, dude, is all the monsters and all the mythology.
This is cool how the Grackle Flint has blood on its face and
That is a
marker.
red shine.
Absent. So there's really a big one thing I'd noticed is that Jeremy Cox puts his first motion blur.
Oh yeah, and takes out the full like blue marker background.
Right. And for my money, I don't mind the motion blur stuff.
Yeah.
But I feel like maybe just the can and not the lid
Right.
would help sell that a little bit more.
It's cool with the Grackle Flints. You would think that they would, I guess maybe you're not trying to hide that
They can't.
flint
It's
right
too
there.
sharp.
It's too sharp.
It's
It
too
rips
sharp.
immediately. Yeah, I was wondering.
Yeah.
All right, so Kev, like he lunges right at him. Then they're like resetting and they're like, oh. Then this is very manga.
What
to me. I
does
feel like
Brendan call this? A semi
semi-splash.
splash,
Yeah,
where there's a splash image that crosses over,
but
the
not
border.
the whole way.
Oh, so wait,
It's
are you on the page?
Oh, we didn't get there yet. We didn't get to the next page yet.
No, I'm on 6.
We're still on 6.
We're still on 6.
The
Okay,
first
I'm going
page
back.
of
Hold
that.
on a
That's
second
all
here.
right.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a giant. It's a splash page that crosses the border. There it is.
but it's not a full 2-page spread.
So it gives you can really measure the amount of impact between a splash and a double page spread,
Yeah.
because this one advances 30% to the right.
Right.
It's
And then
that
you
much
see-
more impact.
Yeah. Him on top. Then they reset, and then the Grackle throws the trash can at Kevin with a clang. And then they're really like grappling. They're having a real fight. And Kevin, and then as we get over to the next page here, they're fighting. He kind of like, he goes red or whatever. He kind of doesn't necessarily black out, but then he punches a hole in the wall, and
That kind of stuns.
he
him a little
stops and
bit.
he's like, "Oh shit!"
And that's a great reaction shot, like we were talking about earlier here. Hold on a second here. Let
Because
me-
even is it
And
Emil?
Jeremy Cox kills that panel.
He does do well on that one.
Hold on, I'm bringing it back up for a close up here. It's great being able to do the side by side.
Yeah, it's really interesting that because Kevin he's like taken aback, and then even Emil, if it is Emil, where the Grackle Flip behind him is kind of just like, oh shit, like what does he know now? Like, is this waking up the power in him? Does he know? Does he even get any type of inkling that like he has woken up the power?
If he has that fear, he overcomes it because he just goes for the sucker.
Well,
punch.
he immediately gets crunched in the face.
It's a very like wrestling, like paced choreography,
yeah, for sure.
violence, where one guy's on top. All this.
Yeah, and they're throwing stuff. A lot of the great onomatopoeias and effects here. The panel 3 with the pop and the layering of like the green, then the pop, then Kevin, then his speed line, then the foreground. That is an amazing panel.
So some of this still, I've heard you guys talk about the impact of the influence of anime style. And at the time, Matt has even talked about how he played with that for a while and then ended up moving away. But when we see some of these things here, do you think this is more classic comic, or do you still see some anime influences in some of the things he's doing here?
I think that if he was bringing more manga influence, we'd see slanted panels.
Well, faces and figures way less anime style than the first 3 Grendels for sure, because and especially Grendel #1, where you get that figure of Eddie with the big feet and the skinny legs. That is like the peak manga.
This looks like standard, like Marvel workmanship, Sal Buscema, Silver Age fight stuff.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Oh, wow.
And then this continues. Again, this is a fight scene that we get more of those great onomatopoeia here. As you referenced, the crunch, the oof, the pop. And finally we get this moment where it's been there all along, but just in case you missed it, Kevin notices, the grackle flint spike on the elbow.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't get him right there. He kind of like dodges it or something. Right?
This is a great sequence.
Yeah.
Like the timing and spacing and choreography. First 2 panels, very little contrast. And then third panel, you got that beautiful red. Yeah. The original all contrast, all movement. And then the extra like little ticks. They look like it looks like an animation arc, on his elbow. One of the best sequences in the book so far.
Yeah.
That right there you're referring to, where he's just avoiding it coming up.
All right, creep.
So funny. It's so funny though. Panel 2 on the next page in the Kamiko, it's these orange marker, black background, all this stuff, and then in the image, it's straight white. I mean, this is a very, very different page.
Big difference in decision there. A lot of different decisions.
I wonder how much Jeremy worked with Matt on this, because I mean, I know for my own work, all I see are the mistakes, and all my head can do is think of the way to fix them. So I wonder if Matt went page by page with Jeremy Cox to just be like, get this orange out of here.
Well, one thing to question is, because this was coming out during Mage 2. So was it that Jeremy Cox had 3 issues of Mage 2 under his belt when he came onto this? Or was this the pilot? Which one was the pilot to seal him into this?
Got it. Yeah.
And also, he does a fantastic job on Mage 2.
Right, for sure.
Definitely. And it creates a continuity. I mean, it creates a covering continuity.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this here prefigures, what I love about this is we also get a prefigure or a foreshadowing. Yeah. I'm sorry, this board, it's great. It's there inside an alleyway. You'd have it at hand. But, additionally, it sure as heck works like a bat as well here. So I think, tiny foreshadowing things. And Matt always talks about how when he comes back to Mage, it's a Zen process and he doesn't know what he's going to write. But I get the feeling with this first one, it was a very different experience. Again, going back to a discussion from Bob Pinaha.
Yeah, Pinaha, I think.
Pinaha. So when
he talks about Bob P.
Bob P. There we go.
Yeah.
Hey, its names are important, man.
They are.
I don't want to slight somebody by mauling their name, but unfortunately, it's the curse of my life. So he mentions that when he first got the script, it sat around for a while, and it was a good thing it sat around for a while, because actually, the name Grackleflint changed after he had it for a few days. He got a message from Matt changing what the Grackleflints were being called to its final form. But he also mentions that when they first talked, before he got the script, Matt talked him through the story, the entire, I'm sure things changed and details changed along the way, but it certainly sounds like Matt came into the first series with a plan for, here's where we're starting, here's where we're going, this is how it's going to end. And then the other 2, he was able to take that Zen approach with. But so, I think this is a great bit of foreshadowing. I think in the next issue, we get a great bit of foreshadowing as well. Any thoughts about what's happening here, art style wise? I mean, the decisions here to go, there's a lot of heavy shadowing. And I think this is interesting that so much happens with shadows as opposed to, I mean, it's not like Matt can't do faces and details. What do you think of this artistic choice here?
I mean, it's very interesting now looking back and forth, especially in panel 3 on the Wham page there. In the Kimiko, it's kind of like a bust painting type of thing.
No bounding line.
Right. No bound. Well, there is a bounding line. But still in the image, they finish out the shoulders and finish out the figure, which is interesting. And they do a whole new bolt. So there is some changes. What I'm really interested in too in this frame is the victim, how he knows it's a grackle flint. Who is he? How does he have any connection and know? Is he some sort of hero as well? Did he have some sort of power? And we just kind of see him fade and be gone.
Can we talk spoilers?
Yeah.
Can we talk spoilers?
Go for it.
So the grackle flints are going after. So how important is having Arthurian legend under your belt? How significant is that to really feeling this story out? Because they're going after the Fisher King, who is lame, so they're attacking all the bums.
Oh, okay.
That's what's going on. But there's been 3 people that have showed up. Yeah, man, the shadows are all super dramatic and heavy. It's got I love this last one on the spread where the grackle flint runs off into gutter space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Really, really cool.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, storyline wise, it's certainly addressed that, I mean, that's what they're doing. They're going off, and anybody who might possibly help Kevin discover who he is or aid him in his fight, potential allies, are being taken out one by one.
Well, he's got to be more than
Mirth has legs. Right?
Yeah. Well, it's got to be something more than a bum, or else how would he know what a grackle flint even is?
Oh, that's
right.
true.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Who's to say? Anyway, Kevin doesn't care that much because he makes a payphone call to 911 and then goes home.
Yeah. Well, and he does. I mean, now he's like, well, what do I do? And he gets rid of any responsibility.
Yeah.
Once
the action cools down, the cynicism comes back.
Well, I think it's kind of like okay. Go ahead,
man.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just feeling it was like one of those things where you're like, you're wrapped up in this thing. You feel like, oh my God, I am dealing with something far beyond like our normal realm of understanding. But then now all of a sudden it's over and I'm back to reality. And now what do I do? I guess I call the police and report the crime. And then
and he has to deal with 2 crazy things that happened. 1, did I really punch a hole in a wall? 2, what the heck was that thing that I just fought? And the mind seeks equilibrium also. And look, these first few episodes, I mean, it goes on throughout the entire story, but especially in these first 2 issues, and this one here, Hero's Journey, we have meeting the mentor, he meets Mirth, and refusal of the call. Now, one could argue that a vast majority of Kevin's experience is one long drawn out refusal of the call that he just begrudgingly gives into because, as I mentioned with Heroes earlier, is he's still surrounded by these experiences, whether he wants to be or not. So he has to take some kind of action or be swallowed by them. But
I don't think he really accepted it till the end, the very end of all 3 series.
So we see the very first, I mean, these are the first signs of refusing the call. I'm just going to try and completely, how do I explain it away? What's going on? Am I being loony? Am I cynic? I lived through this and I don't believe it. And we switch on over and we get to see our mysterious adversary. And, the little symbolism about games is the first kind of game symbol that shows up in here, picking up a die and squeezing it, and that other people are aware of Kevin Matchstick, and that now he's got some power with him, and looking out, brooding over the landscape in response to this that just happened.
Exactly. What I really like about this page is that it does something that typically I don't like to do, which is it changes scenes mid-page. But because the top tier is a 4-panel sequence and it's balanced by the bottom, it works really elegantly.
Yeah.
and carries over onto the next page.
The next page.
Yeah, and then cuts back to Kevin asking
where
his
he
third
even
question.
straight up calls out Captain Marvel. So like,
Yeah, right. Next, I'm playing Captain Marvel. So, yeah. So you were talking about these splitting scenes here, between what's going on with our protagonist and this mysterious antagonist. We've got no idea.
It's the first time that the camera leaves Kevin in 13 pages.
that's right.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if you caught it, but he says he's playing Captain Marvel, much like, the interview you said how he wanted to capture his childhood joy on the shirt. So, he's not talking Carol Danvers or Marvel. He's talking the man who yells Shazam.
Yeah, the other one.
Yeah.
The boy.
the other
Billy
Shazam.
Batson.
He's a boy.
The boy.
Did you know that?
I did, yes, Billy Batson.
I like when Elvis dresses like Captain Marvel in Vegas. I wish Rocco Jerome would do a Elvis Captain Marvel Jr. kind of mashup.
Wow.
But Kevin's question on the next page when he enters the apartment, he's talking about all the issues that he's having. Memory lapses, creature fights, acting in a way that's I know isn't me. And the punchline to that is very cynical. I feel pretty lousy about the whole thing.
I feel lousy.
I think it's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he walks in, he's about to sit in his TV chair, but who's waiting for him there? Mirth. And I love it too, how he's like, I'm not really surprised. It makes sense you're here.
Yeah, and it's a nice call out earlier to Tom Savini's workshop.
Right.
And yeah, I'm not too surprised. And this is another great kind of thing I don't think I'd ever seen anywhere else here. Mirth, just a nice little simple display of Mirth's magic with Kevin's, we see those great reaction shots there.
Yeah. Jeremy Cox with the motion blurs and the color holds on the Rubik's Cube is another huge win for the recolor deck.
Agreed. Yeah, he turns the black like motion that Matt originally did. He turns them white, and then that's cool.
Yeah, and we get also just the total change from the markers being used on the windows to the smooth gradients. So I think when I lost you guys, I was mentioning that, for people who might not be familiar, the whole reason this wasn't just a reprint done with new colors for the sake of doing new colors. When Comico went bankrupt, a lot of this original art or all the original printing materials that were used for printing were just lost. So all of it had to be recolored.
Right. And much of it's, if I'm not mistaken, scanned like directly from comic pages that were out. If they didn't have the original art, they had to scan the comic itself, right? And take the color out manually.
Yeah, that could account for some of the fuzzier.
Yeah, that's why there's some loss in some of the black and some of the minute details that Matt does. Another thing that Jeremy Cox changes is on the next page,
he solves
the Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So like he's just holding it and the colors change to be solved.
This is probably his best job that we've looked at.
Of Jeremy Cox. Yeah.
Where he's actually like helping to tell the story in ways that are tangible.
Yeah. It's nice being able to having the character modeled after yourself. Like I feel like we're seeing
Just
like
look in the mirror.
Look in the mirror. Yeah. Like some of these are great.
I am Mirth. I'm not laughing. No. Who's on first? My name is Mirth. I'm still not laughing.
You're very confused.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
So yeah, they do have a good conversation here. And I like then Kevin's just like, how do you know this? What the hell is happening here?
This is another like set design, like on stage. Like this is like you're sitting in like a balcony seat.
Mm-hmm.
This is an enormous apartment with nothing in it.
Yes.
Right. Super high.
Yeah, the camera's getting 15 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Right, so
I mean, between the street scene with an alley next to it, an office, and a living room. And this body language here. We don't see much in the way of detail, but this complete resignation and overwhelm that we see.
Where he says to start what or who is a grackle foot. I'm also interested, like what tools are Matt using to get these big heavy background lines that he's using in every like panel? Is he got a brush or a marker? You think? I don't know either.
Yeah, it's a brush.
Steady throughout. He's got these. You were calling them carrots or
Carrots are the zigzags.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
there's open carrots and empty carrots.
Oh, yeah, cool. All right, well, they continue.
He's just kind of late. This is the info dump panel.
The-
Yeah, this
And
is
he's
the exposition. This is
Yeah.
what the heck is going on. And we get a few of these early on. I mean, these first
You
few
need them. You
issues-
gotta have them. Yeah,
That's what
Yeah.
the book's about.
yeah. You gotta lay that groundwork.
Kevin's one-word responses are just, he's like exhausted and all right, well, I mean, you're here, you're showing me magic. What
All
do
right,
you have to
evil,
say?
spur, power.
Yeah.
I'll just remember those things.
We're gonna do this.
Well, and he's also the audience stand-in too. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, he's being overwhelmed, and this is just a nice comedic touch with Mirth. We get two kind of bumps, right? We get the first comedic beat here with him leaving through the door and being called out by Kevin, and just how the hell did you make this door open?
Yeah.
So lightening things up, right? We've got a lot of heavy information going on, so a little bit of comedy to leaven that.
Yeah, and like he didn't need to even use the door. He obviously didn't get in through the door. I mean, maybe he did, but I envision him just poofing in.
I really wish it would show on this page a panel of the door closed.
Of the door closed,
Yeah.
like one more panel.
Yeah,
just
there's
the door
very
closed.
few panels of the door. There's
But come on,
actually
next
closed.
page. I love this gag too.
Well,
He's
wait,
like,
wait a second before we get to that. Just storyline wise here, the whole question about just what is a grackle flint. So just laying out.
oh yeah.
I mean, I know this is a reread, and people pretty much already know here.
What is
but-
it?
What's a grackle flint? Yeah, even just looking at what's been bolded here, right? Strongest agent, greatest power of evil seen in some time. Talking about their features, that the spur is extremely dangerous, and we get this mention here, the first mention of your power, right? Beware of it, your power. Can't combat its poison. So he doesn't say poison. It's like power there, and I think he's so overwhelmed. He's not even saying what power. What are you talking
my
about?
power? Yeah, it doesn't even register.
Yeah. That doesn't stop Mirth from going on and making a whole heck of a lot of assumptions. Again, you can do this in comics. I wonder, you could do it on stage. In a movie, it might play a little bit forced because Mirth would almost come across as a bit fanatical, right? Your power, with it and my magic, we shall crush this menace. So he's already being recruited from his, from
he's
his
part of it. Hey, Kev, you don't have a history? There's no grackle flints in history or anything, or that's a sheer Matt Wagner creation?
I think he came on up with it. There's some discussion that Matt has about how he came up with the names, the kind of, he was looking for something with, these hard kind of sounds, kind of mixed gray with something having to do with, implying like crows and that kind of, and ravens and that kind of thing. But I don't think there's a mythological analog that I'm aware of that's been mentioned.
Fits in perfectly.
Yeah.
This is also like one of few straight grids that
Straight
the book
grids.
uses.
Oh,
It
yeah.
says to heighten that humor and that rhythm and stuff like that.
Yeah, when you don't use the grid as much, especially a 6-panel grid like this, you're going from different stuff. It really paces it out to give you the humor beats, and that's like why the humor hits so
Yeah,
well.
for sure, man.
Definitely was re-lettered too. Now that I'm looking at it a little bit more.
So you're talking about this 6-panel grid right here where they're kind of driving
Yeah.
the dialogue with that.
Yeah, the door.
Yeah, cool.
Dude, and then I just love this. He slams it. He thinks he's over, and he's coming back, and Mirth is just like back in the chair again. He's like, yeah, be careful. And like later, remember I said the spur. Again, like you said, Matt laying it down. I feel like he always does lay a few things out in those first issues that are gonna hit in like issue 15 or
You gotta
14
get the narrative balls up in the air so
Yeah.
that when you need them,
There
you've
they
already
are.
established them.
Exactly.
And they're not just some strange looking guys with this physical feature. There's an extra reason. You don't just want to get poked by it because there's going to be a bad effect, as we see later.
Yep. And he again says he really feels lousy about all of this, and then he wakes up, but he thinks it's just another lousy dream.
It's a beautiful 3-panel sequence where there's each panel, though the camera doesn't move, advances the narrative by introducing new motions, emotions, and narrative elements.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What a
And
lousy
we have
dream.
that happening over here with Mirth, everything happening nicely with Mirth, which pretty much all stays the same, telling
Yeah,
a
the
nice
camera.
story with only the motion. and then picking up with the alarm clock the next day. And this kind of fits in, again, rejecting the call. This, he goes from walking home saying this was all a crazy dream, I have no idea what's happening, to now it's the great reset of the next morning. I can just, everything that I'm thinking of, that couldn't have been real.
It couldn't have been real. But like my body hurts, my body aches.
Right.
And Christ, I look like hell.
He gives himself a little Psych 101 self-analysis.
And what we don't see is off the camera here where he opens up his closet and it's just all black t-shirts with lightning bolts on it and all just green pants.
Right.
He only has one shirt, but a bunch
they are cartoon characters in that way.
Yeah. Like Homer.
They dress the same way.
So
all right.
That's an efficiency. That's daily efficiency in
exactly. Yeah. You don't have to think too much.
So Kevin Matchstick gave it to Steve Jobs, who may have gotten it from, what is it? They said Einstein used to go ahead and take that same effect. Didn't care about socks, but you don't have to waste time thinking.
That's true. It takes me a while to pick what shirt I'm going to wear in the morning for sure.
So here, as you said, Ben, I mean, yeah, he's kind of self-analyzing himself. What's the grackle flint? Where's the mother image? Maybe Mirth, yeah. Heads on down. And I'm thinking, so let's think about what happens later in the story. He goes down into this empty subway station, even calls it out. I've never seen it so deserted before, kind of creepy. And he gets onto the subway train. And, as we're going to see here, there's only 3 other, entities on the train. It's 3 other, grackle flints. Later in Hero Defined, and then much more significantly in Hero Denied, Kevin is moving in and out of the fairy realms, more or less at will. And when I was reading through this the other day, I was thinking, well, what's a possible explanation here? And maybe I'm just reaching. Again, it could just be easier to draw, keep it simple, let the fight happen without a bunch of people. But this is morning rush hour time. I mean, he got up at 7:30. So where is everybody? I kind of wonder if he's, kind of stepped in between.
Right. That's interesting. It also lends itself more to this, like, it looks like theater kind of thing. Because like you don't you sometimes have extras in theater, but it's really just let's focus on who's here.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he definitely goes to the side of reality because when he busts out in issue 2, then I think he busts back into the real world and walks up and gets on the subway platform, and there's people, there's normal folks,
right? And their reactions aren't like cataclysmic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's like it's got to be you got to be right, Kev.
Yeah, and I mean, it might not have even. This could also just be, let's add a story element and explanation to something that just wasn't there to begin with. I'm not sure there's any author's intent there, but just trying to look at, explain the situation here of this is just Kevin walking along. Again, all these thought bubbles, right? That otherwise, if we don't have narration captions, all we're doing is watching a silent movie, and we need to
takes that form in the next few pages. Well,
right, so here we get back to action.
Yeah.
The only issue I've ever had, it always sticks out to me, is this choice for how to count 3. Has always struck me. I don't know. I've heard somebody, I think that might actually be tied to a particular way of counting 3. So just that always.
Oh, not starting on your thumb, you mean?
Not starting on your thumb, pulling out those fingers. I don't know. I've tried to do it at times. I cannot do that.
I don't start with my thumb when I count either.
But it's not
I would be like that.
You don't have Eli does it like Kevin, but it's not a storytelling issue. Like, he's telegraphing his fear and shock and surprise. He knows they're grapple fronts. He's recognized the spur. He sees it. He reacts closer, more intense. Oh shit! Here we go.
And he wonks them.
Yeah, no, and this is all great because you get this. It's very cinematic. We get that connection, right? He's looking, he sees, he's looking, he focuses in. This here, I mean, everything happening right here was a huge breakthrough in cinema when, it was first decided that, gosh, if I show a picture of your eye and I show a picture of something, we can create a connection between the two of them. Right. So it's great to see that happening. He then notices, gosh, those don't look like regular folks. And there's another. but gets right into it. Love that big wunk.
Yeah,
that,
and the
you
next
know,
page, the effects are really going for it, man. Especially that pow.
Bring that up.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's so good.
This is probably one of the panels that's most similar across editions.
Right.
It's like
It's
he said,
almost
okay, this is what
exactly.
you're doing. Let me really try to.
Except they got
Trying
the
to lean into
speed,
it.
or they got the motion blur on panel
Oh,
3, which is interesting. That kind of looks cool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind. So if you want to complain about that, complain. They do it twice on the spread,
Right. There's
which
two
is
motion
which is
blurs
kind
here.
of funny, but it's the most. It's a 3-on-1 fight, so it is the climax and most exciting moments.
Yeah. Digging it.
He knows he's got two choices. You got the spur or get on out.
Yeah.
Spur
So
the
he really
track.
just jumps.
Right. And
heaves
you know,
himself
it's
through.
and just because I've got them both up on the screen here now, interesting changes in the use of color.
Yeah.
And much like, again, we get rid of those marker backgrounds, which, again, when they scanned them in, probably from the comic artwork, maybe that just was really hard to replicate. And it was, okay, we don't need to go ahead and show motion that way.
My favorite part of this sequence is the center tier, panels 2 through 5, where 2 and 3 are conjoined without a gutter. Then there's a gutter, and then a symmetrical sequence. So 1 and 2, 3 and 4, no gutter divides them.
Right. Like
I
he's
that.
looking to the right and then he's looking
Yeah.
to the left.
That's what I like about Matt's work.
Yeah.
Is that it's very easy to interpret the body language that he puts into the layout and the form for how you're supposed to pace the story and identify with the character. I love it.
Yeah, and again, just very cinematic. You can feel it flow, and no dialogue at all, right? I mean, they've got no reason to say anything. He's got no reason to say anything. This is just a battle that takes place, like the other one, just in pure silence.
Mhm.
And then we
He
get
just-
that last big crash
He
right
hurls
out.
himself out. And so he smashes
into
into
oncoming train
Yeah,
traffic.
basically. You got a sweet Grendel ad here going on.
Yeah, that's wild to think that they were coming out concurrently.
Like only
What a
issue
workhorse.
2. Yeah, man.
That's crazy. Yeah, it's still another issue to do. So maybe all Grendel was in the can already,
Yeah.
because
Oh,
when
yeah.
it sounds like the Evangeline gang printing
Yeah.
opportunity happened really quickly.
Exactly.
It's like, all right, we got to do something new
We
right
gotta
now.
move to color. Yeah. So it's interesting too. It says TMN copyright 1983 Matt Wagner and Kamiko, which goes on, which foreshadows some of the issues there.
And here my troubles begin.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I mean, also for all the troubles, a much better deal than was typical. I mean, Matt is unique from what I've seen or read in the industry at that time, because and maybe the other Kamiko artists, because they were co-owners of their work, which you get into right around this time or shortly thereafter. Well, actually, I think it was really big around the 90s when Mage 2 was coming out, when there were all those big legal pushes to give Kirby, rights to his work and so forth. And then just here, I love just looking at the old ads for
Yeah, we always do. Yeah.
for all these things here. And then we've got the ad there for Evangeline.
And comics interview ad. That's interesting. They don't advertise too much further in.
In Kamiko.
Yeah, they don't.
I don't know what that is. All right.
Calling out Simonson there. And then, so
What a niche! What a good start to an amazing trilogy
Podcast journey.
Yeah.
So gosh, I don't know. So there's all sorts of other places to go with this. Guys, thanks for joining me. Is there any other thoughts you had about this? I think I was really being very Pollyanna. When I was thinking, gosh, I don't know. There's so little. It feels in many ways, when I was first looking at it, and I've just read this so many times over the years, I was like, I don't know, man. Issue 1, what to say? And I think that's also because I've got a very, again, I typically have a very narrative, and what's going on maybe in the text and the subtext kind of approach. I wasn't sure that there was going to be enough to say about issue 1 to cover a nice chunky episode. I was thinking, maybe we should talk about 2. I think that's out the window for now. So
I mean,
thanks for-
it's 2 is great. I had to like read them both together because it's such a like cliffhanger. It's like, oh my gosh. I was like, I'm sitting here, I'm reading, I might as well just go get it. Just go read. So
This podcast is brought to you by Cherry Coke, the preferred beverage of heroes everywhere. Cherry Coke.
absolutely.
Gosh,
When we
I
get
really
we
need
get
it.
a great call out, I'm just gonna throw it out now anyways, because after this next scene plays out, he's talking about calling into work, you know, talking to Cooch, you know, and that's Cuchinata
oh, I was thinking that, yeah.
over at Kamiko. So,
That's funny.
you know, nice little inside joke kind of
Kevin's day job is that he's an anchor
Yeah,
at Rico.
just like Steve Rogers.
That's great.
That's funny.
Well, cool guys. Hey, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for
Everybody,
having us, Kev.
this is going to be, I don't know when the next one's going to drop. I think honestly, this is going to be either bi-weekly or monthly. I will say this. Love to have you guys back anytime. I mean, the insights and references and thoughts that you have about what's going on panel, off panel, the influences and the changes in the artwork is just golden. And it's what drives so much of, you know, what's so great about the Devil in Detail podcast.
Thanks, man.
Which anybody who's listening to this or watching this, if you are not listening to that, just go get some Omnibuy if you haven't read any Grendel and just start taking that journey. It's amazing. It's an amazing podcast, and you've just had some great episodes and interviews on there. Anything else you want to close on out to let people know the exact places where they can find you guys?
Well, just The Devil in Detail is on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. It's on Spotify. It's really anywhere you get your podcasts, but we also have the vodcast version, which is on my YouTube, youtube.com/Eli Schwab, I guess, Eli.Schwab. I don't know, but just Google search The Devil in Detail or YouTube search The Devil in Detail. It's all there. We got great interviews with a few times with Matt. We got Brennan, Dinah Schutz, Tim Sale.
Everybody.
Yeah, we just did an interview yesterday with Joe Matt. We spent the whole day with Joe Matt. It was pretty amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
You can buy our books at cosmiclionproductions.com. There's zines and square-bound magazines and Eli's comics and Arcane, which we work on together.
Yeah.
You can find my books at bengranoff.com.
All right. And great. Yeah. Great work. Guys, thanks so much for joining me. Hope we get a chance to do this again.
you too.
And anybody watching this, hope you've enjoyed. We'll just keep this on going on as long as we can. There's at least going to be, oh, I don't know,
30.
29 more episodes.
29.
All right.
Plus a 0 issue.
Oh, that's
Zero.
true. The
Actually, two
interludes.
zero issues
Interludes,
because
yeah.
we could put together the first interlude and the
there
second
you go.
one.
There you
Yeah,
go.
there you go.
All right.
Vivat
Thanks for joining us,
Grendel.
everybody. And until next
hey.
time, magic is green. Guy, what were
Magic
you
is
going to say there,
green.
guys?
I was gonna say Vivat Grendel, but then I was like, no. Magic is green.
And Vivat Grendel indeed.